I am so happy to be able to talk with you, Karen Dougherty, more about your work in the world as a psychoanalyst and your interest in the think tank. If it weren't for you, who has this unusual and extraordinary background as a documentary maker,
Mm.
I don't think this YouTube channel would exist. So thanks in advance.
Mm.
But I'm going to ask you to please tell others, including myself, more about yourself and your background and your interest in the think tank.
Well, yeah, thank you, Harriet. It's good to talk about the think tank and to think about the think tank. I think for me, the first time that I encountered that idea, and certainly the psychoanalytic idea about intractable conflict, was many years ago, 30 years ago, through a documentary filmmaker, a Canadian documentary filmmaker who was making a film about the work of the IDI and Vamik Volkan's project in Estonia. So the filmmaker was Alan King. He's a Canadian filmmaker who I was working with back then. And he was making this film called A Dragon's Egg about Vamik Volkan's project in Estonia, in a community after the wall fell that had Russian, sort of ethnic Russians and ethnic Estonians who once the wall fell, were still living together, but were in total conflict with each other in this little town that was kind of a former military base. So the military left, they took a bunch of stuff. The community was almost reduced to rubble. And Vamik Volkan, with the help of an Estonian, I think, psychologist, chose this community to pioneer a project where he gave the community money to rebuild their community center.
Oh.
But they had to work together, and they had to let Alan King film them. So Alan King spent a year going back and forth to Estonia and filming fly on the wall, cinema verite. So, and some interviews, kind of towards verite interviews of the people who were on the committee in the town of ethnic Russians and ethnic Estonians who had generations of bad blood that they were trying to work out and in working on this project together. And so he was showing, Alan King was showing, and Vamik Volkan was showing how the unconscious operates in groups, large groups, ethnic nationalism, the questions of ethnic nationalism, which, as we know, Alderdice has engaged with a lot, especially in Ireland. So when I heard about the think tank and the work of the think tank, I immediately thought of that project, which was the project that sent me from filmmaking into psychoanalysis. That was the beginning of my journey towards becoming a psychoanalyst, because at the time I was working in documentary film and social issue film for a public educational broadcaster here in Ontario in Canada. And it seemed to me that the two ways of thinking had a lot in common, especially given Alan King's work, all of the films that he did, and that they had a lot to say to each other, and that it wasn't that big a leap for me to, start this other way of thinking, becoming a psychoanalyst. It was the two ways of looking and listening and thinking and allowing space for change and tracking change over time seemed to have a lot in common. There was a kind of call and response. And so when I heard about the think tank and Alderdice and his work, I thought, oh, well, that sounds like something that's a natural progression for me, to get involved with somehow.
I'm aware that you've made more recent, or at least advised on more recent documentaries having to do with women athletes,
Mm-hmm.
so makeup and women
Yes.
beauty. And those strike me as analytic projects. I think we're all interested in understanding how we as psychoanalysts can help our troubled world. What do we have to offer that will catch the attention of the public and actually make a difference. How are you thinking about those two projects?
My creative partner, Phyllis Ellis, who is a marvelous filmmaker here in Canada, filmmaker and Olympian. So I've made a bunch of films. She directs and produces these wonderful films. They're all social issue films. A lot of them are feminist films, and a lot of them are films dedicated to making social change in some way, and changing policy.
Hmm.
So, for example, category woman, that was about, human rights abuses, gender abuses in elite women's sports.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, we're seeing a lot of that right now post Olympics with the Algerian boxer who is at the center of the sort of culture wars in the States. Phyllis's film is very much about that issue and was used, I think, at the UN in order to make some legal changes, some policy changes in the IOC. So there's that. The film called Toxic Beauty also was instrumental in getting some of the toxicity out of Johnson and Johnson's baby powder, talc. These are films that are meant to raise awareness and that can add to people's sort of policy changes or lawsuits or class action suits, as is the case with Toxic Beauty. We're doing the same thing now, a sequel to Toxic Beauty that is about basically not toxins in beauty products like Toxic Beauty, but the toxicity of the beauty industry and these standards. It's about the mental health of women and girls and the pressure, especially through social media, to look perfect and to look beautiful. And we're seeing young girls who are face tuning. I don't know if you know what face tuning is, but you can take a picture of yourself and then you can use an app to just like fix all the imperfections, make your nose a little smaller and make your cheekbones a little higher. And you're seeing young women getting cosmetic surgery to match their face-tuned face, for
Oh,
example. And so there are some big lawsuits right now happening against some of the large social media companies. And that's what the film is sort of trying to get some momentum behind so that we can make some change on that level in social media so that they actually. So definitely documentaries can make social change. I think they can.
I
And
can't help but thinking about all the individuals that the films reach. I mean, the systems intervention is wonderful and clear, but think of the young women who watch these and think about them. It's about their affection for becoming something they're not, or their denial regarding use of makeup. I think there's something about the beauty in these documentaries that I've seen, at least trailers, and not the entire thing,
Mm,
that has, I think, the power to reach the individual as well
mm,
regarding denial,
mm. Yes.
association, um, uh, a kind of interruption of one's development as an individual to become something one is not. But even if that young person, that teenager, or that young adult who watches these documentaries might realize that they're engaged in something that is, uh, in a certain way, artificial. It's not authentic. Like, who are they really?
Yeah. And for whom is it? Because it is for these larger systems, right? It is for capitalism. It is for, it is for control. So once you start to recognize that you're and that systems are trying to control you and trying to control your way of thinking so that you will be, function in a certain way, so that elites in society can do what they will, what they wish. Then once you start to see behind the veil, then hopefully it does help serve as an intervention, right?
I think somehow the visual image, for
Mm,
example, of the application of lipstick
mm,
without knowing what's in there, it gets at at a different part of our emotional
Yeah.
selves.
I think it is very emotional, and I think you're pulling an image from Toxic Beauty,
Right,
right? That beautiful image of bright red lipstick that you don't know has lead in it,
exactly.
right? And
Right.
then, or the powder that's going on that's actually endocrine disruptors or those kinds of things. And those beautiful images are so powerful. And that film was nominated for an international Emmy for Phyllis's direction because it is so much, she is trying to do something very emotional and unconscious. So she is trying to sort of like puncture something, make an interpretation the way we do as analysts in the clinic.
I can't help but highlight your role as a psychoanalyst and consultant and collaborated with her, that you're making an intervention in what within most teenagers and young adults, women today is an intractable conflict. You know, how beautiful can I be? What's the matter with me? How come I'm not as sought after as I would like to be? The sort of self-esteem issues that are developmentally appropriate and that then get carried to extremes that we worry about.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a testament to Phyllis, I think that she includes sort of a mental health component in all the films, let alone ones that are explicitly about mental health. So I've been part of, the first documentary she and I worked on together was called Girls' Night Out, and it was about the binge drinking epidemic among young women. And so part of it is to help the crew as well, because documentary filmmakers, like many therapists and analysts, often come from trauma, but they don't have training.
Mhm.
They don't have training to work with the sort of traumatized subjects whose stories they're helping to tell in order to tell a larger story. And so sometimes borders and boundaries get crossed, and people are helping too much. Filmmakers are helping too much, or they're victims of vicarious trauma.
Mhm.
So that's another part of the way that I work with the film. It's not just helping with the content or the subjects, but also helping with the crew and the filmmaker, making sure that everybody's, sort of supported, and not trying to do more than they ought, than they can.
Thank you so much for sort of explicating your role there.
Mm.
How many psychoanalysts would imagine what a difference they could make um, in this sort of approach to problems in the
Mm.
public today? It's just
Yeah.
in sports, in beauty, and in growing up. So, I want to just mention that each time I've wanted to focus on your activity as a psychoanalyst, you tell us about the the filmmaker.
I know.
And
That's
I want to say that you're showing us what a psychoanalyst can do in the world that nobody else is quite as qualified to do.
mm,
So
mm.
thank you so much for making this more explicit and for sharing your interest and your skills and also your very incisive psychoanalytic thinking with the rest of the think tank on all kinds of topics.
Yeah, what a privilege it is for me to get to listen to all these people who have so much experience with sort of intractable conflict on a more, sort of social level or global level. It's been a real eye opener, and so thank you for inviting me onto the think tank. I appreciate it.
It's been a gift to us. Thank you.